Hey everybody, thanks again for clicking on the ZimmGeek channel. This is my third installment of my History of the Captain Marvels, and this chapter I'm calling The Attack of the Captain Marvel Zombies. In the first two chapters of this series, we went over the original Captain Marvel printed by Fawcett Publications, who was a tremendously huge hit during the 30s and 40s, so much so that national periodicals went into a tizzy claiming that it was too close to Superman, eventually throwing it into court and making the character jump quickly into obscurity. The idea behind the character, though, wasn't about to go away, as other copycats soon sprung up all over the world, including Marvel Man over in England, a property that lasted over there well into the mid-1960s. Even the name Captain Marvel was fought over here in the States for publication, eventually going to Marvel Comics, who paid off the guy who realized that DC never bothered to secure the copyright. Marvel then created their own Captain Marvel, which never really survived the sales, even though it got a little cosmic with Jim Starlin's help. This character lasted until 1983, when Marvel decided to kill him off in their first official graphic novel. Now, if you're a fan of comics, specifically American mainstream comics, you'll realize that no good idea or character or even name ever stays dead for very long. Sad thing is that whenever these characters become resurrected, they seem to be a little more soulless and a little less fun than when they originally started out. So to me, they almost become like zombies. Thus, the name of this chapter. Here we go. One of the very first comics I bought as a kid was Shazam #1, the return of the original Captain Marvel. Even original artist and co-creator C.C. Beck was back doing artwork. Shazam #1 was dated February 1973, and unlike the quality line of comic characters that DC had gone through and bought outright in the 50s so that they could print Black Hawk and Plastic Man, DC actually leased the character back from Fawcett Publications. So the character property that they had tried so hard to squelch back in the 1950s turned into a rental for them in the 1970s. Not only that, but to further complicate matters, Marvel Comics was already printing a character called Captain Marvel, and they weren't about to let that title go, no matter how badly the character was selling. So seriously, why did DC do this? Well, their official response was that they wanted to try something new with a different character, but I think, honestly, they had merchandisers coming at them telling them how ideal it would be to rent out the original Big Red Cheese for other merchandising. After all, it had been 20 years, and a lot of these guys that were corporate merchandisers had grown up with the original Billy Batson Captain Marvel. And sure enough, shortly after that, once DC started printing Shazam as a comic, a TV show popped up, a cartoon show popped up, all sorts of action figures popped up, became a good merchandising gold mine for DC. Unfortunately, you can't say the same thing about printing the comic. C.C. Beck left after about 10 issues because he was tired of what he called the inept stories that he was getting, and after a few faltering attempts at creative teams and trying to modernize him, Captain Marvel didn't last more than 35 issues overall. And the deal that DC had signed leasing the character from Fawcett was by the page. In fact, in 1974, Superman ended up fighting a character called Captain Thunder in issue number 276 of Superman. And Captain Thunder was eerily similar to Captain Marvel. Now, why didn't they have the characters cross over directly? Well, it was because DC was paying to lease Captain Marvel by the page. And at that point, they were probably not even sure they were going to keep Captain Marvel for very much longer, especially considering how the sales had dropped. But the merchandising must have proven to be worth it, because even though they had stopped printing Shazam as a title, they kept Captain Marvel and the Marvel family around off and on over the years, finally buying the character outright in 1992, along with the rest of the Fawcett stable of characters. Even after that, and with the squabbles they had with Marvel over the character name Captain Marvel, they kept the character going off and on over the years. Everybody seemed to have a chance at resurrecting the character and trying their own spin at it, but like I said before, each time he came back was a little more soulless and a little less fun. And despite reported proposals to change the character name, they still kept it as Captain Marvel until eventually they realized people were just calling him Shazam anyway, so they switched his name over to Shazam. And now, especially with the motion picture coming out into the theaters, you know that we're going to see Shazam out for a long time to come, no matter what version we see him in. And again, DC seems to be behind the 8 ball when it comes to copywriting the Shazam name if you look at the Shazam app and the Shazam ATMs. Unless there's some leasing contracts going on that I haven't been able to find. While all this was going on, Marvel Comics was still keeping the Captain Marvel name alive, even after bumping off Mar-Vell in 1983, must have been 82, because in 1982, in Spider-Man Annual number 16, a new Captain Marvel emerged. This time, young Monica Rambeau, who was a New Orleans Harbor Patrol boat captain, tried to stop a weapon from being formed and was exposed to alien radiation that allowed her to convert her body into energy. She called herself Captain Marvel. This character floundered off and on through the 90s and 2000s, even becoming the leader of the Avengers for a short period of time. Well, maybe not too short. I think it was about 5 years. Still, it was pretty obvious that Marvel didn't have a whole lot of faith in the character, as she passed the Captain Marvel name off to another alien character, Mar-Vell, who called himself Captain Marvel. Though she's had a number of name changes over the years, Monica Rambeau is still around in the Marvel Universe, though she's used surprisingly sparingly. And for some reason, even after the demise of Mar-Vell, she never did pick up the Captain Marvel name again, which, to me, is a pure shame. Monica Rambeau goes by the superhero name Photon and Pulsar and is currently known as Spectrum since 2013. The alien Mar-Vell, originally known as Legacy, took the name Captain Marvel, was said to be a clone of the original Mar-Vell. He barely lasted 10 years before they killed him off in Thunderbolts. Again, he floundered around and didn't quite have a home. He also jumped between hero and villain as well, finally sacrificing himself to save the universe. That was 2006. Then, apparently, from 2004 until 2012, the name Captain Marvel in Marvel Comics was tossed around kind of like a hot potato. The pink-skinned Kree Phyla Vell apparently picked it up for a little while, and eventually she dropped it and became Quasar. During the Secret Invasion storyline, a Skrull named Kanar disguised himself as Captain Marvel and took the name for a little bit. Then another Kree called Ko-Var, who was originally calling himself Marvel Boy, took the name Captain Marvel for a short period of time, eventually dropping it and becoming the Protector. Then in 2012, it was decided to give the name to Carol Danvers, and that's the Captain Marvel we have now, and that's in the movie. We'll get right back to her in a little bit. I need to jump back in the timeline and tell you about a few more ghosts that sprung up, a few more zombies. Back when the original Captain Marvel was shut down in the early 50s, Marvel Man sprung up over in England and ran all the way through the mid-60s. Well, guess who came back? In that magic year of 1982, editor Des Skin decided to start Warrior magazine and revived Marvel Man. Under the guidance of then newcomer Alan Moore, Marvel Man was a more realistic spin of the original whimsical Marvel Man family. Though the lightheartedness in the character was long gone, the quality of the writing and the artwork on this property really made it a benchmark for superheroes in general. And Warrior magazine was also the precursor to more Swamp Thing and Watchmen work later. In fact, V for Vendetta was serialized in Warrior magazine initially. Marvel Man and the talents of Alan Moore didn't go unnoticed here in the States. Very quickly, as soon as Warrior magazine shut down, Marvel Man came over to the States, only relabeled as Miracle Man in order to avoid any Marvel entanglements. The Eclipse run reran the Moore material first and then started new material, and eventually Moore's stuff ran out. Neil Gaiman came on as a writer, and it had a number of different creative people doing the artwork. Eclipse went under in 94, and Miracle Man ran for 24 issues by then. What then started up was a large amount of legal battles and back and forth and trying to find a new home for Miracle Man, and everyone was arguing over who owned what and what part of the property was owned by who. Could probably do a whole nother video just on this legal entanglement alone. Eventually, Mar-Vell Comics ended up with the property, especially once they figured out that Mick Anglo, the original creator and the guy who worked on Marvel Man way back in the 60s, still retained the rights to the character. Over a period of years and a number of disentanglements, Marvel has reprinted a good number of the Mick Anglo stories and has apparently secured total rights to the Miracle Man property and will soon be reprinting and then printing new material, or at least that's what they say. It's supposed to come up here anytime now. Out of all of the so-called zombies that Captain Marvel has spawned, Miracle Man, Marvel Man, is probably one of the best out of all of the incarnations, and if you ever get a chance to read that material, I highly recommend it. I also didn't want this chapter in Captain Marvel history to go by without at least making a nod to another Captain Marvel ghost or zombie clone, if you will, and that is Prime from Malibu Comics. The first issue of Prime was dated June 1993, and had 13-year-old Kevin Green get the ability to turn into a gigantically huge-muscled superhero, very similar to Captain Marvel. But in this version, he retained Kevin Green's personality and maturity. Prime was a major factor in the Malibu pantheon of characters, including being a part of Malibu's Ultra Force. And eventually I'll get around to doing another video that covers all of the Malibu line. Prime himself only lasted a few years until Malibu was bought out by Marvel. Like I said, that's another story for another time. So springing forth from this intensely popular character in the 30s and 40s, the idea and concept of Captain Marvel and the name Captain Marvel has constantly been in comics in one form or another, fought over, tossed around, and mostly, in my opinion, very disrespected. And granted, time has moved on, and the readership taste, the demographics for comics has matured so much that the original whimsical attitude that Captain Marvel had is gone. And you hardly ever see anything remotely resembling that in comics anymore, unless you're lucky enough to catch a reprint or two. Personally, I'm kind of dreading seeing either Captain Marvel movie, the Brie Larson one, or the Zachary Levi Shazam movie, but I'll probably sit through both of them and hope for the best. Currently, neither Marvel or DC can keep a Captain Marvel title running or Shazam title running for more than just a few issues before they have to stop and restart it again. And most of the time, they're doing that just to retain the title or to keep the merchandising property alive. I have some very final thoughts on the Carol Danvers Captain Marvel that I'm probably going to save for another video, because I kind of want this one to be a historical note to update you on the character, the name, and how crazy this comic business actually is. So catch me up the line on ZimmGeek number 17, where we'll talk about Captain Marvel again. One last time, where we'll cover Carol Danvers. In the meantime, my next video is going to cover drawing a cartoon character from scratch. Those are always a lot of fun. If you didn't see the one I just did on SpongeBob, I hope you take the time to go back and look at that. Grab a pencil and paper, have some fun. So that's really a brief overview of the history of all the Captain Marvels, or most all of the Captain Marvels, in 3 easy parts. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you subscribe to the channel. Comment below if you have anything to say about what I'm doing. Hopefully it's all good. Make sure you give the thumbs up if you like it. Give it a thumbs down if you don't. Let me know. Make sure you subscribe also. Subscriptions are very important on YouTube. Ring that bell for notifications. I try to bring you videos as often as I possibly can, but through commercial work and other things that pop up in my life, things have been a little slow getting content up on this channel lately. I'm hoping to pick that up here real soon. So until next time, in the next ZimmGeek video that you watch, take care, and thanks a lot for being here.